Awesome. Welcome, everyone, to Perspectives on Black-Jewish Relations today, Hard Truths and New Paths. My name is Dazia Wallerson, and I am the African American Alliance Manager at the Combat Antisemitism Movement. I'm joined today by my co-moderator, Jill Altshuler, Lower Merion community activist. And we are here to examine the complexities and the triumphs and the relationship building that shapes Black Jewish community initiatives, and also why these initiatives exist, and to explore what meaningful, enduring partnership truly requires. So tonight's roundtable discussion, we are featuring three guests who have been deeply committed to the work and offering their diverse perspectives and experiences within the field. Just a little bit about CAM. We lead a united front against Jew hatred, and we have many partnerships, over 850 interfaith partnerships, working with organizations and activists and social media influencers. And specifically within our African American Alliance, I work to develop relationship building between Black and Jewish communities, also to reflect on the enduring legacy of the past. And then also we work together to prevent the spread of anti-Semitism and racism, and to help grow our capacities for cooperation within these special communities. So thank you for joining us tonight. So we just wanted to share a little bit about tonight's discussion. We obviously want to establish some community rules here that we're going to approach this conversation, of course, welcoming with an open mind, open hearts, as diverse perspectives are shared. We also encourage listening with curiosity and, just assuming good intent for people sharing their truths, and to embrace discomfort, and that we are all in a learning process here today. So please, we ask to just continue keeping an open mind. And also just a bit for housekeeping, we will have questions. We invite questions for folks to share in the Q&A section, and we will have a designated space towards the end of the segment to answer those questions.
I'm
Anything,
back.
Jill?
Sorry about that. Yes,
No
sorry.
problem at all.
So like Deja said, I am Jill Altshuler. I live in the Philadelphia area. And for the past few years, frankly, since October 7th, I've been trying to find ways to bring Black and Jewish community members together, create opportunities, conversation, socialize, learning. And it has proven to be challenging for various reasons, which I think will be touched on tonight. And really, the reason I wanted to create a conversation such as we're going to have tonight is what I have found is that there tends to be a focus on a lot of the common things that Black and Jewish communities face, especially in terms of hatred. And one thing that the Jewish community is really facing, especially since 10/7, is a unique kind of hatred that is really can be confusing and hard to understand, but it's frightening, and a lot of us feel very alone. So I feel like I need for that to be somehow brought into the conversation. So I figured, hey, let's have a nationwide conversation and see where that goes. So I appreciate everyone coming tonight.
So just want to introduce our guests today. We have David Kaufman, who is a U.S. opinion editor and columnist, a former editor and columnist at the New York Post, and a regular contributor to publications including The Telegraph, The Forward, The National Post, Airmail, and Monocle. He is a graduate of NYU with a degree in journalism, and Brandeis University with a degree in sociology and Middle Eastern studies, and he lives in New York with his two sons. Welcome, David. Also joining us, we have Irini Parms-Green, is a recent graduate from Xavier University of Louisiana, where she triple majored in political science, psychological science, and history. She is a 2025 Truman Scholar and a Gladys Blackburn Fellow with BAMA, and she works to cultivate meaningful Black Jewish engagement through arts programming and university partnerships. Irini is also the co-founder and co-leader of Still We Rose, a national recognized initiative dedicated to building sustainable dialogue, education, and solidarity between Black and Jewish communities. Welcome, Irini. Lastly, we have Dr. Charles Jacobs, who has spent more than 3 decades pursuing justice on a global scale. He holds a doctorate of education from Harvard University and has channeled that foundation into a life of extraordinary moral courage and civic leadership. And in 1993, Dr. Jacobs co-founded the American Anti-Slavery Group alongside Muslim and Christian Africans, shining the international spotlight on the enslavement of thousands of Black African Christians in Sudan, and then also named by the Ford as one of America's top 50 Jewish leaders. Dr. Jacob has founded and co-founded multiple impact organizations dedicated to combating anti-Semitism, radical extremism, and the erosion of democracy values. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. So we are going to jump right into this juicy segment. First and foremost, we wanted to know from you. We invited each of you because your diverse perspectives and involvement with Black-Jewish relations is very apparent. And so we wanted to know more about what is the relationship that you hold within the Black and Jewish relations.
David, can we start with you, David?
Of course. So I'm David Kaufman. I am the U.S. opinion editor at the Daily Mail and a columnist and former New York Post editor. I am Black and Jewish. My mother is Jewish, Ashkenazi, from New York, or from Buffalo, New York, but from New York. My dad's African-American from Texas. I'm me from California. So I couldn't be more emblematic of this conversation and how folks at sort of the American journey. I'm very Zionistic. I've spent quite a lot of time living in Israel. I've become, like many people, sort of an unlikely activist post October 7th. And I write quite a bit about these topics, not particularly about Black-Jewish relations, but about the whole situation. But I often write about it from my perspective as somebody who is both African-American and Jewish American. And there are other people who write about this, but most tend to be more on the, I would call left to far left side. I'm more in the center, maybe slightly center right, but I don't consider myself a right-wing person, more of a center person.
Okay. Charles, would you like to?
Sure. Okay. So my story is that I was born in Newark, New Jersey, a Black and Jewish city at the time. And I was a regular Jewish liberal. I joined the NAACP in high school. I got called an N-loving Jew every time I tried to stick up for Black people when there were fist fights and things like that. The main part of my story is that I found out in the 1990s that Blacks were being bought and sold as slaves in Sudan. Sudan was Africa's largest country. The North was Arab Muslim. The South was Black Christian. We didn't know the word at the time, that there was a declared jihad against the South. And jihadist terrorists would storm Christian African villages, slaughter the men, rape the women, and take the women and girls away as slaves. I started a movement to free the slaves. I was joined by the real heroes. They're called Christian Solidarity International. They found a way that we could go and pay some people to bring the slaves back. And I went there 3 times illegally in a wartime. I interviewed escaped slaves. And I have to tell you that when my daughter, who lives in Israel, called me on October 7th a few years ago and told me what happened to the Jews, I knew that because I had seen it firsthand from the eyes and the mouths of these slave girls who told me that when they came in the villages, they took the girls and they started to rape them. And the one who said no was slaughtered and nobody else said no. And it was in my heart for a long time. We worked very, very hard to free the slaves. We freed tens of thousands of slaves. This got to George Bush's ears through his church, and he forced Khartoum in the north to allow the South to decide its own fate through a plebiscite. Of course, 99.9% of the blacks in the South voted to leave, and the world's newest nation is called South Sudan, and that was because of our work. I think the problem with the black and Jewish relationship, if you give me one more minute, is that Palestinians and Muslims are sold to black people in America as the blacks, right? They're the blacks because they're dark skinned, they're supposedly darker skinned than the Jews, and they're poor, and they're being set upon by the big white oppressor Israelis, who are neither big nor white nor oppressing. And and so when I went to Sudan, I couldn't get Amnesty International to care about black slaves. They didn't want to do it because in their concept, right, if in this country, in America, you are defined as a minority and maybe oppressed, that translates around the world. So the Arabs and Muslims who were doing this, you can't say anything critical of minority people in America. So that translated to not being able to say anything critical about what was happening, what they were doing to blacks, nor could you take on the black case, because that would mean that you would be against some of the very people that they thought America was oppressing. That is a ball of wax that has meant that the human rights community has abandoned the very people, blacks, women, gays, that they earned their oats and got their halos for protecting in the first place here. So that's the conundrum that we have. So I'll stop.
You got a little ahead of us, Charles.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
You might have to repeat some of that. Irini, can you please tell us some more about you?
Yeah, sure. So hello everyone. Y'all already kind of know like the bare bone basics. I think I'm African American. A lot of people think I'm Jewish. I'm actually not, but I think it's important how I got involved with the work of Black-Jewish relations in general. So I just graduated in December from Xavier University of Louisiana. It's a historically Black college and university in New Orleans, in the I would consider Deep South. And so around 2022, early 2022, 2023, spring 2023, my friend, well, I would say myself and some peers were part of the honors program at Xavier, and we saw a lot of anti-Semitism rapidly increasing in our community. It went from, I would just say, like from rhetoric, a lot around that time, there was a lot of, unfortunately, hateful rhetoric from African American, I would say, leaders, and more in the mainstream media, like Kanye West, Whoopi Goldberg, and things of that nature. And there was kind of this big conversation of, people in our community, the African American community, are saying certain things, and of course, being on the Black campus, the question was, like, well, how do we address this? We love Kanye, but we don't believe that what he's saying is right. And so, myself and three other peers, we co-founded an initiative named Still We Rose, where we would basically counter anti-Semitism and anti-Blackness, because commonly what you see is that when anti-Semitism rises, anti-Blackness does, and vice versa, and is generally at the hands of white supremacy. And so we started it, like I said, initiative. We did things like Black Jewish trivia. We did like a lot of things in our local community. We talked with mostly college campuses like Tulane, Xavier, of course, Dillard. We really wanted to target the Black and Jewish community to basically start having the hard conversations, and considering the shared history that we've had for a long time, especially, a lot of us date back to the civil rights movements, but if we look at it today, there's a lot of tension still with our community. And so we started that initiative. We went on to win a national prize, and we became internationally recognized for our initiative. And so from there, I've been consistently involved with the work. We've had a lot of events on and off of our campus. We've been able to bring like Robert Kraft and Meek Mill with the Blue Square campaign to our campus. And so currently today, where I am, I'm a fellow with BAMA. BAMA is a cross-cultural arts nonprofit. We're able to bring artists from Israel onto HBCU campuses specifically right now, so that HBCU students can really get a taste of what Jewish culture looks like from all different sizes, and just, I would say, backgrounds. And so that's really how I got involved with the work. Going, I would say 3 to 4 years now. It's been a really great joy for me, and I think I'll just end off right there so we get into the question.
Thank you, Irini. And now for our next question for everybody, and whoever wants to jump in first, please do. Assuming that in some way, shape, or form, all of us see value or importance in Black and Jewish relationships. In one way or another, we all, think that there's value, each community benefits in one way or another. So I'm curious how each of you sees the value or the importance of this relationship and the initiatives. I'm sorry.
I can start. So I come from this in a probably sort of a counterintuitive or not necessarily conventional way of thinking. I mean, I've written quite a bit about this. I have spent the last 2.5 years, but before that as well, really sort of questioning and trying to understand what are the motivations behind the focus right now on Black-Jewish relations. I mean, I come obviously from a home where Black-Jewish relations were very important. Black-Jewish relations was how I got here. So I don't in any way minimize that. But in the post-October 7th period, but also before that, I began to really ask what is the motive? There's a lot of focus, a lot of attention, a lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of energy placed in initiatives and programs to either rekindle or reaffirm historic Black Jewish alliances or to reestablish them. Of course, I think that all forms of cross-cultural dialogue are important. But at this particular moment, I've begun to ask publicly, what is the motivation for this? Why are we doing this? Why is there so much emphasis placed on this relationship? Particularly because it's often, as I have written, sort of a feel-good, nostalgic kind of effort that in many ways doesn't really dovetail with the current moment. And also it is very important to say that yes, Jews and Blacks are aligned in the quest to end white supremacy, of course, but that's not necessarily really what's motivating or what is the pressing issue for Jews right now. What the pressing issue for Jews right now in America is anti-Semitism. The pressing issue for Jews right now is anti-Zionism, and these things are entirely connected with October 7th, with Hamas, with the war in Israel, with now what's happening in Iran, what's happening in Lebanon. And most important, and yes, of course, on the right, we are seeing, as we've always seen, examples of anti-Semitism and the mix of white supremacy from the right. But more or equally important, we see a very, very strong alliance, a strong rise of anti-Semitism resulting from pro-Palestinian sentiments, is jihadism, is the alignment of fundamentalism, and the kind of warped sort of manipulation of identity politics and intersectionality that insist over and over again that African Americans and Palestinian Americans, that the Black American experience is similar to the Palestinian experience, and this constant need to sort of align these two movements, which I believe have very little, if not nothing, to do with each other. And so while we're spending so much time, so much energy, trying to reestablish a relationship between Blacks and Jews, which in some ways might not even been there in the first place, what we're avoiding is a much more important issue, which is the embrace by some, not all, but the embrace by some African American leaders of the post-Palestinian agenda, of this misguided notion that Blacks and Palestinians have so much in common, which is completely untrue. The African American struggle during the civil rights movement was defined by nonviolence. The Palestinian movement has been defined solely by violence. So when I see Palestinian groups trying to say that they are, embracing the legacy of African Americans, I am offended by that. But more importantly, there is this unwillingness to talk about this. Henry Louis Gates just did that major 3-part series PBS. I did not watch the whole thing, but I'm pretty certain that nowhere in there did they talk about the misguided can actually, I would suppose, I'm not certain, I would suppose that nowhere in there, like in most of the conversations right now about Black and Jewish dialogue, is there any talk about, what I call the misguided embrace by Black leaders of the Palestinian movement, because it's not sort of politically correct, and people are afraid of being canceled, and people are being afraid of being called racist, and people are being afraid of being called Islamophobic, and none of those things are true. None of those things are true. There's nothing racist about saying that, the Black embrace of the pro-Palestinian movement is just wrong. There's nothing anti-Semitic about saying that, perhaps Jews and Blacks don't have so much in common anymore. Maybe this is not the best place to be investing our energy. And there's nothing Islamophobic about saying that, the Palestinian movement has been virtually defined by violence. That is true. So that's sort of where I'm coming from right now, is really asking, why are we spending so much time on these initiatives? Not that they aren't important, but why are we spending so much time focusing on rekindling and reestablishing past allegiances when the problems facing Blacks and Jews today are quite different, and they overlap, but in many ways they are very, very different. And by refusing to acknowledge that, we're actually doing a disservice to everybody. And it feels lazy, it feels inauthentic, and it slightly feels like it's only going to make things worse. And most importantly, it's not true. So much of this post-October 7th moment has been rooted in a series of lies, whatever side you believe in, but rooted in a series of lies. And until we really begin to speak the truth about what is happening, there will not be change. So that's where I
am. Charles,
David,
I just wanted to respond real quick to David. One thing, I think even as the Black and Jewish communities face different forms of hatred or not different challenges, I think that's part of the point of, building, relationships so we can advocate for each other's causes, but there hasn't been conversation about the extreme Islamism that's facing the Jewish community.
Again, I want to say I would never say that we should stop doing something. Everything
right. No, I'm just saying.
Beneficial. What is so frustrating to me is that there is a refusal to engage in other forms of advocacy work. And in fact, this during MLK weekend, we saw so many Palestinian groups, pro-Palestinian groups, hold all kinds of events in honor of MLK. To me, it was like insane. MLK is the walking definition of nonviolence. And these Palestinian groups, they're having resistance teach-ins to celebrate MLK. The irony in that statement, the contradictions in that statement are massive, yet nobody says anything. That's the problem.
Okay, Charles, I see you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, okay, this is really good, David. I think you put your finger on something. I think the reason that everybody's focused on this is Jewish shock. The Jewish community right now is in total shock. That we never, most of them, never thought that Jews would be in the golden land of America in defense, and having policemen having to guard our children as they go to school, or having to guard our synagogues. The Jews are in shock, and one of the biggest shocks was been what they would tell you is the betrayal of their Black friends, of many of their Black friends, because after all, the Jews can quite rightly make the case that we invested our money and our passion and our talents in the civil rights movement, and we paid a price for that. And we did it, and we did a good thing. It was a righteous thing, and we did it. And we now felt that after October 7th, we got stabbed in the back by big, important Black groups. Not all Blacks. I mean, we've still got plenty of Black friends. You should have Dumasani here. But we got stabbed in them, and the Jews are in shock. Okay, so when the Jews are in shock, they're nostalgic. They want to bring back the old times, or what they thought was the old times, where we marched together against Nazis, right, and against white supremacists. And they don't want to make the turn that you have made, David, and that is to say, this is a new world. Our enemy is a kind of a extremist left, extremist Islamic merger in a red-green alliance. And if we thought that was true, we would have to change our whole lives. We would have to be frightened. We'd have to change our whole lives. We'd have to buck up against what is politically correct in America, and we would really feel alone. How much nicer it would be if we could just reach out to our Black brothers and sisters and retrieve the old world that we had. That's why everybody's into this, David. And I think you're right. Somebody has to turn the page on and think of it in a different way. Think of it in a different way. And there's two ways, in my view, to think of it. The first is liberal democracy is under assault by progressivism and wokeism, right? That wants to re-tribalize America. America is e pluribus unum, all the many tribes one. That's what brings us together. It's a miraculous thing. It hasn't happened anywhere else in the world. Every other nation is a blood and soil nation. Okay, so if we don't get back to individualism and treating people as individuals and individual rights trump the state, then we're all going to lose. And the second thing is I think we can convince our Black brothers and sisters that the jihadists are not their friends. We can do that by explaining to them what's happening right now in Africa. I'm going to be at a congressional meeting next week in Washington where the Africans are coming together to show Congress what's happening in their countries by the jihadist, people. So that's what I have to say. I think you said it exactly right, David. The Jews don't want to change.
Rini, do you have a response you want to contribute?
Yeah, I think my contribution will likely be kind of different from the two panelists, just in the way of like just in the nature and authenticity of the work that I've done. I think I want to enter this conversation more so just from, I think it's important to note that the work that I started was pre-October 7th. I'm not saying that the work that's being done now is not needed. I just think that this is the best way that I can enter the conversation, and I think an area of impact that also needs a little bit of focus. Like I said, it was pre-October 7th when we started Still We Rose, and it was important that myself and my Jewish peers and now friends, we have the conversations of the stereotypes that we face of a lot of hate and misinformation that was not only on the internet then, but it's still on the internet now. And I think it's honestly a root of a lot of the problems that we're talking about now, especially politically in scheme of why some groups support certain things. I think hate and misinformation and disinformation play a really big part in that. And I think having the initiative that I co-founded with my peers that started pre-October 7th, because we knew each other, we had the conversations, we broke over bread, we have these shared values. I think that's some of the most important things that the Black and Jewish communities share together. From I won't really say religion, but I think, like I said, we break bread over things. We sing song, we have a really great time, we have a sense of justice that we always carry with ourselves. I think having conversations with my Jewish peers and making sure other Black students were involved and them, us ultimately becoming friends and kind of, I won't say creating an alliance, but creating a community together. When October 7th hit, they automatically knew that, on Tulane, unfortunately, they were being treated horribly, but they can come on our HBCU campus. We could have a Kwanzaa Hanukkah and have a great time. And I think that's something very important about the initiative that not only that I have now, but I think some organizations are trying to get there, but I would say in Stewie Rose, that is what we did. And like I say, even now to this day, I still talk to a lot of my Jewish friends, and they talk with me. They come on our campus. We have events, and I think it's allowed us to help them have like a safe space somewhere where they probably never thought that they would have one in this modern day time. So I think I would just also underscore that is an importance in the Black Jewish relations work right now, that we need a lot more, not just on HBCU campuses, but on all college campuses. Because I remember my friends from Tulane, they were being egged, they were being like, it was a lot of hate speech and rhetoric, like they did not feel safe on their campus. But they can come on our Black campus and feel like, hey, I not only see somebody who I know, but I know they face the stereotypes. I know they've been demonized and experienced racism in the same light that I have. And like I said, that's just really, that was just so important at that point in time, and something that also needs to be underscored in the conversation.
That's blessed work. That's God's work.
I
This should
mean,
spread all over. Absolutely.
as a college student, I mean, it's incredible. It really is, and impactful. And that's, one really unique way of building this type of connection.
If I could say
I
something that's, I think,
wanna,
oh, I'm sorry, Dazia.
sorry, go ahead.
Just going to
I
say,
just
I
quickly
think,
wanted to, oh, sorry. Go ahead, David.
sorry, very quickly, I just wanted to say that what I think is most important about the work you're doing, Arini, is that one of the things I also think is very important, and again, this speaks to the silence and the timidity and the fear of really speaking out, is that the average Black young person in America has nothing in common with folks in Gaza or Hamas people or Islamic fundamentalists, but they have everything in common with young Israeli people. And people are very afraid to say that. One of the things I always say about being in Israel is that it's really interesting how regular Israel is and how regular the people are there. They're just kind of like any other Western people. So what I love about the work that you're doing is when you bring Israeli artists to HBCU campuses to show who these people are, one of the greatest crimes of the post-October 7th moment has been the dehumanization of Israelis and the removal of their humanity and reducing them to some monolith, violent monolith. And that is part of the problem, is that, everybody will say, well, Black kids have so much in common with Palestinian freedom fighters, which is completely not true. But the truth of the matter is they do have your average, 22-year-old, young Black person in America, despite the army situation, has a lot in common with a 22-year-old Israeli. And I salute the fact, Arini, that you are helping to bring that to life.
I have a question for Arini. Arini, why do you suppose that there are so many Blacks, at least we see it that way, who have turned against the Jewish community? What do you think the reasons are?
I think that's a really great question. I think honestly, if I'm being honest, there are a few different reasons. Like I said, a lot the really core nature of the work that I do is not even politics. It's focused on like hate, misinformation, disinformation. I think that even pre-October 7th, there are a lot of preconceived notions about the Jewish community and the Black community that we addressed along in our campaign. Like I said, yes, there were shared things of stereotypes of the history and the atrocities that we faced. I think there were also a lot of, like I said, preconceived notions that both Black and Jewish communities had about each other. I said Kanye West made outrageous comments, Whoopi Goldberg, a lot of Black community leaders made outrageous comments about, Black people saying Black people are the real Jews. And then I remember like one time we sat down, we had a conversation, and they're like, okay, well, what have you heard about the Black community? And it was like, oh, they're poor, they're ghetto, they're this and that. And it's like, oh, well, what did you hear about Jewish people? Oh, all Jewish people are white, they run the media. So like I said, like a lot of this disinformation and misinformation that students have about each other, but they don't have any Jewish friends, they don't have any Black friends on both sides. So I think that's one of the main issues. I think another issue is, I think unfortunately a lot of Black people today still do think that Jewish people run things and that they are able to white pass and kind of have all these privileges that I think it's hard. Like, this really goes back to David's point about every community not being a monolith. I think there's such this preconceived notion of what a Jewish person looks like, especially in the Black community, that can lead to issues that kind of help them kind of feed into the disinformation and hate. And I think that's very dangerous because I think, like, prime example, before I even started Still We Rose, there are a lot of people who I met, I had no idea they were Jewish. To a common Black person, they'll think they're white. And so by that assumption, when a Black person thinks that someone is white, they automatically assume they have white privilege, not understanding, no, they're not white, they're Jewish. These are the things that they face in their family and things like that. I will also say, I think another issue is, honestly, I think in America, like I said, I live in the South. I'm sure we all know the global South. We have a lot of issues, especially socioeconomically. I think there are a lot of Black people right now who, I think there's this issue in America where when you are, I won't say poor per se, but when I think like at some point, it is hard for minority communities to feel as if they can afford to worry about justice issues until it's like right in their face. I think that's a hard truth, but I think it's an honest truth. And I say that like two complete different splits of the socioeconomic line. Because what I will say is that when I see people in the Black community kind of, going to protest time, protests and things like that, what you commonly see is that they're probably, unfortunately, privileged. They have the time to do it. And I think, like I said, a lot of them do still in a way feed into the hate and disinformation that's online. So I think there's that side, and I think there's also the kind of like the common day Black person who's kind of, poor, working a lot of jobs, still feels that we're fighting racism, which we are. But I think that, this Jewish, like the anti-Semitism and even just things going on in Jewish communities and other communities kind of just in their world doesn't have the time to kind of like brush across like anything that they're dealing with. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that's some of the big common problems that we see. Like, I don't know. What are y'all's thoughts on that?
Well, I want to quickly jump in, Arinia. A lot of what you shared, I agree with. And I think that we're dealing with a human issue. We're dealing with, bias. We're dealing with changing perspectives, judgment a lot of the time. And I think that what you shared about values, the importance of values, the importance of people having that shared connection is really where the work lies. And David, I hear you thinking about the motivations and why this specific the money and the effort and the time that's put behind this. But I think we have two communities that have endured harmful atrocities and have insane resilience and have overcome and triumphed. And if we continue to create intentional space for those communities to recognize that within themselves and between each other, there's so much more of what we can do together. And we need to define those values. We need to show those commonalities. And yeah, I think that needs to be seen. A huge part of my work and what I struggle with is that there's also, in addition to the disinformation and misinformation and hate that's out there, there's also a lack of visibility on the good work that actually exists and has been existing over time. And I still am like racking my brain around how do we get that out there? How do we show more of the celebration and joy of both, customs, traditions, holidays? How do we show that when we're standing together on the front lines, that needs to be visibly shown, because oftentimes when people don't see it, they just don't think it exists. So I think that that's a huge part of also the issue here too, that contributes to the strain.
I just want to add one thing. I don't necessarily believe this narrative that most Blacks today are anti-Semitic. I actually think that is a manufacturing of the media that wants to.
Yeah, I agree.
If you will, it come. It's always just as with everything amongst identity politics. It's always the loudest voices in the room, and they're the ones who are promoting. I think most Black people just aren't really thinking about Jewish people. They're thinking.
I agree.
About themselves, and they think about their families and day. So I think, there were so many articles in the New York Times and other kind of progressive media early post October 7th talking about this great schism. But when you really dug down and read those articles, it didn't hold up. The people who were interviewed and making these claims were very, very far left extremists who had an agenda, who were trying to promote this ideology. And one last thing. One of the key issues here is this issue of race, and we can't avoid it. It's a very difficult topic. It's a very sensitive topic. The Jews are white trope, and it's something that I speak about a lot. My mother is an Ashkenazi Jew. For all intents and purposes, she is white, and, that's fine. Like, I don't have a problem with that, but my experience as a Jew, I'm not white. So obviously, the theory or the trope that Jews are white, I'm walking evidence that is not true. And I spend a lot of time in Jewish worlds where lots of people aren't white. They're not necessarily Black, but they're not white. They're not what would be considered white. But again, it goes, whenever I hear this conversation about Jews and color, Jews as being white, because the initial response is to say, the reflexive response is to say, well, we have Ethiopian Jews, we have Sephardic Jews, we have this kind of Jews. It's to prove that Jews aren't white. That's the reflective response. But my question is, why are we even asking this? What are the motivations behind aligning Jews and race? What's the goal here? Why does it matter? Because if you look at any conversation around Jews and race right now, it almost always, 99% of the time, reflexively then goes to a conversation of Jews are privileged, Jews have this, Jews have that, Jews are more economically have more economic advantage, or Jews are white colonizers, Jews have pushed out brown Palestinians from their land. And these conversations, any conversation about Jews and race, is always used as a tool and as a vehicle to get to a point where Jews must explain themselves, justify themselves, justify their achievement, and are blamed for that achievement. And more importantly, this conversation is used ultimately as a way to justify resistance against white oppression. And what that means in the context of Jews today in the world is it means Islamic jihadism, it means Hamas, and it means October 7th. Any conversation around Jews and race ultimately, almost always, inevitably ends up as a tool of Hamas apologism and a tool to justify the murder of Jewish people. And I think if we were to explain it like that, it is a tool of racism and violence, this conversation, then that I think a Black person could understand, because that is how Black people, at least from my experience, understand race in America. Race is a tool that ultimately often winds up to justify violence. So I think that is a really important point. When I hear the conversation about Jews and race, my only response is, why are we asking this and why does it matter?
This is good. That's
Yeah.
very good. I want to make sure that I want to help Arini get more known. And I never heard about your work. So before this is over or after this is over, I have a huge social media following.
Absolutely.
Please send me your stuff. I really want people to see what you do. And
As soon as I met her,
yeah,
she had me. I'm hearing her story. I was just like, will you please join me in this discussion? So this is, I think, pretty close to the last question, and we have some great Q&A questions that we're definitely going to get to very soon. So with all of the challenges that we've talked about, and we know, I think Arini has shared a lot of viable solutions in terms of, how to address some of the challenges, the tensions. I think as especially a college student, to be able to, employ some of that is incredible. Charles, I think what the work you do with the African Jewish Alliance, I think it's kind of a unique way of bringing Blacks and Jews together to work on this very important issue, bringing awareness and ending the slavery and other atrocities taking place in Africa, Black Africans by Islamists. I mean, that's something that we can tackle together. That's really important work we can do together.
I think that this is not going to be all the way solved unless we add on to the kind of work that Arini is doing and the kind of discussions that David has brought forward. Unless we add to it, let's free Black slaves today. I mean, what is Black power all about? Blacks have holy power because they shed their blood getting to where they are in America, right? And they suffered. So what is that for? It's not to leave other Blacks behind. It's to be a leading force in anti-slavery work around the world. And the most horrendous and shocking, and now in the news a little bit after we pushed and pushed and pushed, is what's going on in Africa, particularly Nigeria. I would love to introduce to these conversations the voices of victims, Black victims of jihad, slavers, and massacres. And I'm working with Nigerians and Sudanese and Mauritanians who happen to be Black Muslim slaves serving Arab Berber masters, and other people in Africa. And I really want the Black community. This is one way more that we could advance the notion that David brings up about race into this, that Blacks don't know. Americans don't know. It's a taboo subject because you're not allowed to say anything that might offend any Muslim or any Arab anywhere. But the fact is, if you don't say it, you're abandoning people who are being enslaved, and that's a horrific sin. It's a horrific sin. So what I would like to do is to be able, and that's what my work is with my Nigerian partners in America and others, is to introduce the voices of the enslaved and the persecuted.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and however, we want to use this as a jumping off point to figure out how to, get that work more
I mean,
known, because that is
There are Nigerian churches in many American cities, and they're scared many of them are scared to speak out because their relatives are over in Nigeria and they could be hurt by it. But there's some who are willing to speak out, and they would love for people to go to their church and to say, "We stand with you." Black people, especially black people, and blacks and Jews together would be amazing. So I think
mhm.
there's enormous opportunity for that. Okay.
David, do you have any ideas for like a really productive way for Jews and Blacks to work together, be together, something that's,
I mean,
really has a lot of
I think what it really requires is a willingness to embrace honesty and to sort of say, to really speak out about what we can't even get to, like, constructive tools about how to get to the next level, because we're not there yet. I mean,
right.
it's when you what it when I see Palestinian groups hijacking MLK weekend, I am furious. It is a personal offense. My father and my aunt went to segregated schools. They were at the front line of desegregation and paid for it through the violence of white segregationists that didn't want them to be in mixed schools. But my father and aunt didn't pick up guns and shoot people and kidnap people and rape people. So when I see the MLK holiday and our African-American history, and the same with the history of the apartheid movement in South Africa, as evidenced by Nelson Mandela, it was mostly, not entirely, but mostly nonviolent. So what can we do? Well, as Black people, we need to say enough. I'm tired of my history being hijacked by violent jihadis, and I will not stand for it anymore. And our Jewish allies, if they're so concerned about us and so concerned about Black history and Black legacy and Black liberation, they need to say it as well. One of the things that were so frustrating for me in MLK was that you saw all of these pro-Israel folks frustrated at the hijacking of the MLK weekend by these pro-Palestinian groups, but so few were willing to actually say anything because they were afraid of being called Islamophobic or being canceled. Everybody has to stop living in this moment of fear. And the key reason why is that the folks aligned against us, the jihadis, the white supremacists, all the folks who want to take us down and who want to kill us, they're not afraid. They have no fear. They are relentless, they are ruthless, and they have no boundaries. And what do we do in return? We check ourselves. We worry about being correct. We worry about offending people. We worry about making sure people have a seat at the table. Enough. Make a new table. Make a new table with people who don't support those organizations that want to kill you. Make a table with people who don't support organizations that want to hijack our noble history for their craven, murderous purposes. So I think that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to take, and what I definitely agree with is that it takes a lot of courage and bravery to have these hard conversations about a lot of the truth that is, not discussed out of fear or anxiety. So I agree with that part for sure. Deja.
Yeah, I really appreciate us looking at the elephant from different angles. So I'm just processing and taking it all in. And I think that I keep going back to the fact that I really don't think, and I'm not trying to use this as an excuse, but I really don't think that this is as thought, like we have not gotten to that level yet. Yes. And I think that I'm more in the space of creating connection, creating possibilities of relationships, to have these hard conversations. You know, the container needs to be held. And like I said, when people can connect across values, it's really important. And I think that we need to channel, or a huge part of this is to create those spaces for us to channel that energy, because if people are disconnected or they can't relate to each other, then we have no hope. And so maybe I'm just approaching this very practically, but to know the initiatives that exist, and we have some folks on the call that we're going to bring in, who actively create those containers for relationship building, for closeness, for connection, for more of a intimacy, and bring me into your world, bring me into. I really operate in that space, and so while I hear, you know, the hard truths and conversations to have that are, you know, that combat, I also think like we need to work on prevention and the places, like I said, that bring us together. And so and we move in towards our shared humanity. So I want to bring that in as a part of this as well.
I agree. Can I add something?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think we already know, of course, I've done Still We Rose. I published a op-ed in EJP in February during Black History Month that kind of talks a lot about this already, about dialogue being important, education initiatives, and even the arts. And I think what you said really hits the nail on the head, Deja, because I spoke at the Eradicate Hate Global Summit, I think like 2 years ago. And something that my mentor always tells me when we first started this work is that it's so hard to hate someone who you know. It's like I said earlier, you know, it's very hard for, you know, someone to say, oh, I hate Jewish people, I hate this. Okay, but you have a Jewish friend. Like, and I know it's a much more difficult conversation, but that really is important because like someone like me, like I said, I was never involved with the Jewish community or even Jewish work before. Of course, I started paying a lot more attention in college to my community, and my peers and I decided to start this initiative. But you know, all it really does take sometimes for some people is a conversation to understand, you know, well, what's true, what's not true. Do I know someone who identifies with this and do I not? I think as human beings, of course, we've advanced so much, but it really is sometimes that has so much power in just someone knowing someone who identifies with that community, you know, that movement, whatever it is. And so I just wanted to say that. And I just also, because I feel like I didn't really talk as much about Bama, but like I said, we bring Israeli artists from Israel, well, of course, from Israel to campuses, especially HBCU campuses. Lots of times that's Black students, like their first and only interaction with someone who is Jewish, especially most of the time they look like them. Like David said, Ethiopian Jews. We've had Jewish artists from North Africa. You know, sometimes that really truthfully is like, I won't say all that it takes, but it is that one thing sometimes is that's prevention, like Deja was saying, that stops them from like immediate believing, oh, all Jewish people are bad, or, you know, just to have all these preconceived notions and stereotypes. Sometimes all it really does take is to know one person who identifies with this. And maybe instead of going to the internet and kind of going down rabbit holes of coming to their own conclusions, they'll instead go ask their Jewish friend, you know, what do you think about this? How does this make you feel? Do you need support right now? So I just wanted to add that really small, just to really just underscore the importance of what.
Yeah. Thank you, Irini. I don't know how you got muted for some reason at the very end there, but we heard all the important, really important stuff that you said. Thank you so much. At this point, we have two guests that we want to introduce. I will introduce first Elise Picker and Claudette Hines from the Rekindle Fellowship, which is an organization that is focused on, they have cohorts of Black and Jewish community members coming together for dialogue, relationship building, and I'll leave it to them to share a little more briefly about the work that they are doing and some of the successes and maybe, you know, some challenges.
Sure. Thanks, Jill. When I clicked over to join as a panelist, it cut out and I missed everything that you said until it logged me back in.
Okay.
Is Claudette also joining? Is she the second person you're introducing?
Yes.
Okay,
I
so she
believe
might also be
she
it
should be
took a
here
minute to
soon.
switch over.
Okay.
So yeah, I was gonna just say a couple words about Rekindle as an organization as a whole, and then if Claudette joins us, she can speak a little bit more about what it takes to actually be part of a chapter. She's from our Greater Hartford chapter. So for those who aren't aware, Rekindle is a national Black Jewish dialogue program that began in Cleveland in 2021 by Matt Fieldman, who's a co-founder with Charmaine Rice, and he's now our part-time executive director. We have a small staff that is running chapters and alumni programming in Cleveland, as well as chapters throughout the U.S. from coast to coast. I don't know where everyone on this call is located, but we are, as Jill knows, launching our first chapter in Philadelphia this fall, as well as in several other cities. And the whole point of Rekindle is just that, is to bring Jewish and Black members of the community together for dialogue, for conversation, to build friendships, and eventually move towards allyship and be able to work together in our individual communities. And so the fellowship itself is a 15-hour curriculum that covers roughly 15 different topics. From just getting to know each other, talking about Jews and whiteness, and talking about Black Jews and Jews of color, intergenerational trauma, how do we address hate, learning about our city's own local Black and Jewish histories and how we've gotten to where we are today in 2026, and talking about what is allyship and how do we get there together. Um, in addition to that 15-hour curriculum, the cohorts, which are usually 12 to 16 individuals, work in small groups to host programs that are meaningful to them. So a group might consist of 2 Jewish and 2 Black fellows, and someone might want to invite their group to their house for Shabbat dinner, or attend a church service together, or do some other cultural play or book reading in their community. It kind of takes it out of the classroom and really helps develop those relationships on a deeper level. And the goal is, after the 15 hours takes about 2 to 3 months over 5 3-hour sessions. The goal is to have this group of alumni graduate together and then continue working together in their community in ways that are meaningful to them. And then you start another cohort and you have another 12 to 16 alumni join your group. And over time, you can really build up. So in Cleveland, for example, they have about 200 alumni now from almost 13 finished cohorts. And so they are doing programming on a monthly basis, bringing their alumni together, sometimes for more social outings, and sometimes for doing volunteer work together. They're working on programs going into schools and reading books that are both relevant to the Black community and the Jewish community, doing other work together. And so our other cities are now getting to that point where they have alumni groups and they are starting to take community action together. So if anyone out here is interested in learning more, Jill, I don't know if you can either just drop my email in the chat. People are welcome to reach out to me and I can give a more thorough overview of the program.
I think we're going to send out like a comprehensive,
Wow.
email at the end with, there are a lot of links to share with all of the, our great speakers here
Perfect.
today. So it'll be all in one big email,
All
hopefully,
right,
to
well,
make
thank
it
you. And
convenient.
I remember reading
think,
your article when it came out a couple of months ago. So nice to put a face with a
yeah.
name.
Thank you. So
I think Claudette might not be here. So I think you really gave a great bird's eye view of the work that Rekindle does. And at this point, Dazia is going to introduce one more, and then we'll get to Q&A.
Yes, before I move into introducing my next special guest, I do want to shout out my community, dear community Leap Forward, who have been a part of for the last 10 years. And we specifically are, representative of all different faiths and backgrounds. And we come together on helping each other and our communities around the world heal and grow together, but first being the change we wish to see in the world. We reflect on ourselves and how we can connect to ourselves more deeply, and then help support each other in building caring and cooperative communities. And so a lot of my personal work in this work while working at CAM is also to provide unity suppers and have low barrier ways for people to come together and share a meal and have these difficult conversations, have inspiring conversations, talking about our values and morals and what's important to us and how we can be better global citizens for each other and ourselves in the world. So I just wanted to shout out my Leap Forward community on the call, and then also wanted to bring in a part of that work, which is my next guest, who is Dr. Harriet Wims, who is the executive director of the Jews of Color Mishpacha Project. And so Dr. Wims and I have worked extensively in the local Baltimore area, doing these unity dinners together. And I just also wanted to spotlight her work regarding Jews of color. So welcome, Dr. Harriet.
I'm so grateful to be here. And David, it's good to be with you. And I haven't seen you at one of our gatherings yet, but I hope that you will be able to join us soon.
Please invite me. I'll be there.
The Jews of Color Mishpacha Project is a not-for-profit organization that I started by mistake. And I started it because I happened to be in a room where Alana Kaufman, who is the executive director of the Jews of Color Initiative, was speaking. And I turned around and there were Jews of color in that space. And I had, for so long, thought I was the only Jewish person of color right here in Baltimore. And I decided to try to figure out how to bring people together. And it was during COVID. And so we were on Zoom and we were able to create this amazing Shabbaton that brought together people who were Jewish people of color, Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, but also across varied political, socioeconomic backgrounds. And the following year in 2022, we hosted our first in-person gathering. We've been together now for 5 years. Last year, we had 165 people come to our weekend gathering, and we also partner with organizations to ensure that dialogue is continuing to happen. And the most powerful thing for me is that within this program, Black Jewish kids and BIPOC Jewish kids have been able to see other kids who look like them. And our Jewish elders of color are meeting other elders who are Jewish and people of color, and the isolation is dissipating. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is that dialogue has been shut down in this current climate. And when we stop talking to each other, that's how we start to demonize each other. And so, as a kind of grandmother to everyone, bringing them together at the dinner table, one of the things that I say is this is a pluralistic setting. And if you want to have a conversation after Shabbat, just put a little star on or purple dot on your name tag so that conversations can be nourishing in order to have people speak their truths and disable the lies that have been discussed. And I do agree that when we have come together and we have broken bread together, it's really difficult to hate. And so Leap Forward has been one of the organizations that the Jews of Color Mishpacha Project has been able to partner with, along with dozens of others, to try to create a society where we are able to listen and learn and grow together.
Amen to that. Thank you, Dr. Harriet.
Let's see. I guess we'll just start going down the list of questions. Deja, what do you think?
Sounds
Or
good.
comments?
You can go ahead and take us on the first one.
Okay. And some of them, I just want to go back to the ground rules or the shared rules, and I want to honor everyone's comments or questions in the Q&A, and some might rub people the wrong way. But if we can just be a little open-minded and gracious of everyone's own opinion and perspective, that would be much appreciated. So, with the first comment, is I agree with David about the misguided connection of the Black and Palestinian community. I often wonder how so many members of the Black community can overlook the signs of violent Arab and Muslim supremacism behind the Palestinian cause, given the Black experience with white supremacism in the US. It says, will anyone comment on this? But I think David's probably, I think we've touched on that. Hopefully, Liz, you're okay, because that was quite a while ago from your question.
I just want to go back to what I said. I don't think that most Black people in America are thinking like this. Again, when it comes to when it comes to identity politics, it is always the loudest voices in the room, and they drown out everybody else, and they create an environment through fear and through intimidation that if you do speak out, you will be at the receiving end of repercussions, canceling and the like. So this, I think, is the big issue. Is the big issue here. It's not that there's a mass plurality of African Americans thinking this way. Again, it's the loudest voices in the room, and what it takes is countering those voices.
And I think that's actually the same, has to do with the next comment, the same response that you just gave, David. Having always supported rights for the Black community for years, Charles is right. I feel betrayed. I see so much hatred coming from the Black community, and it is painful. And the hatred, I think, is probably from the loudest voices that you see, on social media, marching in the streets with the, even no matter what they're rioting for. And it's obviously not just Black people, but those are the loud voices that people hear the most about. So, I think it's hard to say the Black community, the Jewish community. It's really, unfortunately, those loudest voices are giving everyone a bad name. So go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, I mean, it may well be true that the majority, even the vast majority of Black people are not anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish in any way, and are maybe even neutral or pro-Israel. But politically, that matters less than we would want it to matter, because the people in power are the people in power. And the leadership of many of the Black institutions have led the Democratic Party to think that that's not the case. And that and what's driving against us, and what we see, you could say it's only the loudest voices, but the fact that they've become the loudest voices is not insignificant. And it's because power doesn't always go through one man, one vote. So I agree with David that the vast majority of Blacks are not anti-Semitic, but the Black community is being spoken for by elements that are against us. And that's something that the Black community has to solve, right?
It needs to be solved. I don't think that necessarily Black people should be tasked solely with that endeavor, because part of the problem also is that, Jews also have a stake in this. Jews also have a role in this. As I said, I was just as furious as not seeing Black groups pushing back against, Palestinian solidarity teach-ins for MLK Day, as I was disappointed in seeing Jewish groups not pushing back to say, because Jewish groups have just as much of a leg in this issue. But both groups are operating by the same mechanisms, this fear of being taken
Agreed.
down. And so, this is a wonderful opportunity for Blacks and Jews to work together. They have a direct stake in the dismantling of these false alliance narratives, because they punish both groups and they dishonor both groups, and in some cases they lead to violence.
I agree with you.
I think it's really important to note, and I don't want to speak for our young colleague here, but I wrote a piece about how at HBCUs, there have been virtually no anti-Israel protests. They almost do not exist, and we could think about, and the Times did a piece about this where they looked at that phenomenon. And of course, in their understanding, it had to do with, economic issues, the fact that so many kids who go to HBCU schools, my grandparents met at HBC school, my niece goes to an HBC school, so I'm familiar with them. But the Times sort of attributed it to the unique economic situations and expectations that put on young Black kids to achieve, and they can't risk these kinds of potential conflicts with authority and police, and that's very true. But the real reason why there aren't any Palestinian anti-Israel protests at HBCUs is because there basically aren't very many Jews there, because you need Jews in order to have these protests, because that is the act of intimidation. Now, that's sort of, that can be perceived as being tangential, but it just sort of speaks to the fact that these ideas of Zionism and anti-Semitism and of course racism, they're all connected. They're all connected.
I just want to quickly just jump into a few questions down because I think a few of these questions have been answered throughout the program, but maybe to Irini or maybe Charles, how would you evaluate, this question's from Jim Rose, how would you evaluate any program or effort to build Black-Jewish relationships? What measures, return on investment would you propose?
I guess.
Wow.
Well, you want to go
Rini,
first?
go ahead.
Okay. Okay. I think this is definitely a heavily loaded question. Let's see. I would say, I guess measures. I mean, I can tell you what Civil Rose has done. We've done a lot, and I think our return on investment has been great. Um, but I guess most specifically a measure, I think, okay, I just have to be blunt, but I think when you do something and then other organizations, people start to do it, then you know you're doing something right. So like I said, our Still We Rose was pre-October 7th, and then after October 7th happened, a lot of other organizations and institutions began kind of trying to implement similar things. I also kind of did want to touch a little bit on David's point about HBCUs literally like really having nothing. I won't say anything, not having anything to do, but we definitely have not had really any anti-Israel protests or even anti-Semitic protests or any, well, not necessarily. Okay, I'm saying that wrong. We HBCU campuses have not had any anti-Semitic rhetoric or sentiment or movements. And David already touched on that a lot. And I think it's also important to note that it like is Deja was saying, a lot of the things that we do never really makes the news. When I did Story Rose, we actually went to Israel July of 2023. And there were other HBCUs on the trip with me. There was Clark, Atlanta, there was Spelman, Morehouse, and a few others. Oftentimes too, when we've done Story Rose things, we've always included other HBCUs and they've asked to be involved, along with I don't know if other people know about, but the UNCF Tacoma Alum Alliance. They've actually done a lot of Black-Jewish relations too. That's very important. And so I would say a lot of those organizations have done a lot of similar things of what we have done. And I think that is kind of cliche, but I think that's a very big thing on return of investment. When you see other organizations starting to do the same things, because it reaches out to as many people as possible, to as many communities as possible, you know you're doing something right. I think. I think return on investment when talking about something like this is difficult to kind of measure per se. Um, but I think as long as we continue to have difficult conversations like this and we continue to not only spread the word, but like I said, have big institutions like UNCF implement actual programming where they bring Black and Jewish communities, especially students together. That's a very big way, in my opinion, to measure return on investment. So I don't know if that was helpful in answering. You can definitely feel free to come with a follow-up question if not.
I think that's right, and I think that one way of measuring it would be how many Arini type groups there are, and how
Mhm.
far she spreads her work, and how many Black students go to Israel, and how many Black Jewish Shabbat dinners and stuff there are. I mean,
Mhm.
that's measurable stuff, right?
Mhm.
I would just want to add to that. To me, there's the heart and the head, and you're working the heart side of this, the heart side of the emotional person to
Mhm.
person stuff, and that is key to all of it, right? The head part, it seems to me, has to be how many Black people are coming to understand why they have been falsely told that the Palestinians are the Blacks in the region. How many of them have come to understand why that's a falsehood? How many of them have come to understand why Islamism is not a friend of Black people around the country? And that's my lane. And your lane is the heart lane. And I think, they both go together perfectly well.
Awesome. I'm going to move us into another question. Why do Jill and Deja think building Black-Jewish relations is important, and what do you both think there is so much focus on this relationship now?
I can answer first if you want.
Yeah.
I mean, mine is a very personal reason, for lack of a better word, just in my own experience. That would probably, it's hard to nutshell version it, and I think if I go into it, it would take too much time. But really, it's just my own personal experience since October 7th, kind of reflecting on the work that I had done. Not that I've been in anti-racism activism for a long time, but was one of those that really jumped in 2020, and just locally in my community put everything I had into that work. And I felt really good about it. I was very passionate about it. And come 10/7, I kind of had to put the brakes on for a little and really worked on my Jewish brothers and sisters. And it just started reflecting. I said I couldn't nutshell version it, and I didn't want to go in, but basically, just kind of confused and a little hurt. One of those that, a lot of the Black people who I felt like I developed some good relationships with, weren't. I didn't expect any marching in the streets or anything like that. But hey, I hear that there's a lot of anti-Semitism going on. How are you doing? So it made me realize that I think there is a bond that, I wasn't alive in the civil rights movement time, but just growing up in my childhood in a pretty diverse community and making me reflect back. I grew up with a lot of Black friends, and it was also a very Jewish community, and it just felt normal and natural. And not to say anything against any other ethnic group, but that's, the group that I feel like I have the most just affinity for whatever reason. So that's why it was just really important to me personally, and as an on the ground, unaffiliated with any type of organization here where I live, I've been kind of racking my brain trying to figure out ways to create opportunities to bring us together and have conversations. And yes, I'm part of what I think is really important that isn't being brought up in those conversations is the hatred that Jewish people are facing from the left. That just, I think people are afraid to talk about because it kind of like make it sound like we're prioritizing ourselves. But there's a lot of that hesitancy and anxiety about Jews wanting to put ourselves first in a moment in time where we are just, the danger is outrageous. So that's my connection to the work. And I don't have the original question the way it was worded in front of me, but I hope I answered it.
Yeah, you did. You absolutely did, Jill. Thank you. Mine, it's hard to say because it's a loaded question for me as well as far as my journey. But I think that there have been several points as far as growing up in the Crown Heights, Brownsville area of Brooklyn, and just being exposed to a lot of multicultural, diversity of different foods and musics and traditions and such, and really having that gift coming up from New York City of really understanding and honoring different holidays within the Jewish tradition and faith, and also uplifting like Kwanzaa and celebrating that within my own African-American community, and seeing a lot of similarities. But over time, essentially, really, this work has been defined by my relationship with my mentor, Ronit. Shout out to you, Ronit, and her, and the work that our community has done after October 7th. And, really just trying to understand what the breakdowns and how the misinformation and disinformation is formed, and the rising rates in anti-Semitism afterwards, and looking at my own community and saying different parts, say, what are we doing about this, and why are we not speaking up enough about this? And that was a really tough journey. Talk about, pulling on courage and needing that courage to stand up and speak up, especially when you're going against something that is so largely promoted as hate and violence out there that awaits you. And so really to just be able to connect to the human heart and have those values and understanding that we are the one and the same, we come from the same cloth, is really important. And Ronit really helped me connect to that. And it just brought out and ignited this passion for me to just stand up and speak up and say that, you know, we're actually more alike than we're different. And you know, it's fueled so many different avenues in my life. Jill is a very close personal friend, and we oftentimes have our tensions as well. And so it's just a beautiful dance. And I think that you know, more people, like I said, need to see this. They need to be exposed to this. We need to show that our relationships are real, they're authentic, they exist, and we want to do meaningful work together. We want to prioritize our humanity together. So I'll stop there. There's probably a lot that I'm missing, but I'll pause there. So we have a question from Jim Rose. Is Still We Rose portable to other campuses? So Rini, I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, I'll take it. I'm actually replying to it in the chat. It's funny.
Oh, okay. Okay, great.
So basically, yeah, I was just saying, it's been really hard to sustain funding. So we've been sustaining it through number one, BAMA. So of course we get as many Jewish artists and residents on HBCU campuses as possible. Because like I said, I would say that's one of the key literal fundamental ways of, in my opinion, kind of going back to the return on investment question, that return on investment can happen because as many students that are impacted and they even just have proximity to what someone, you know, who is Jewish. Like I said, I had never met anyone Jewish to my knowledge before I started the project. And so that's one thing I would also say. Like I said, funding has been really hard. So I would just rather give you some things that we've done. Because I think if you do want to bring it to a campus, you can find your own way to do it. Because unfortunately, like I said, we don't have funding right now. So we often, of course, also partner with local Jewish organizations like Jewish Federation, ADL, Golden Ring. And then what I'm going to do to your question, I'm going to link our website in the chat so you can see some things that we did so that if someone does want to bring it to their campuses, they can look at doing similar strategies because literally everything that we've done on there, from doing like talks with preachers and rabbis, you know, we just did so many things. Someone something on the campus, you can definitely feel free to do any of the things that we've done.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Rini. I believe we have 7 minutes left remaining on our time. Jill, did you have any questions that you wanted to address
No, well,
specifically?
I was just going to say, I mean, we understand that people, you know, if you need to leave, want to leave anytime is completely fine. I think our panelists, I know David and Charles have a definite hard stop at 8:30. I don't know about you, Irini and Deja. I didn't know if you wanted to spend a few extra minutes to get to some extra questions, although not all the panelists will be here. So a little bit of improvising perhaps, depending on how everyone feels about that.
It's okay. I think we can take maybe 2 more minutes and then there may be an announcements, any announcements that we may have. I know I have one personally
Sure.
about our fellowship program, but maybe we can just take 2 more questions and then close.
Sure.
Okay. I know that Janice says that she's curious to know what some of the unique issues are that Jews of color are experiencing. Janice, I don't know if you mean in terms of the Black and Jewish relationship building or just in general, but so I don't know if David can speak to that, but I am specifically curious about the Black and Jewish, you know, relationship building, community building work, how Black Jews, if they call themselves Black Jews or Jews of color, where they feel like do they belong more on one side than the other? I'm so curious to really, you know, and unfortunately I only know a handful of Black Jews and I'm not in frequent contact with them, but I am very curious how they
And
feel about.
What I can do after you may want to address this, David, is I can bring Dr. Harriet back in to you know, contribute to this specific question as well.
What is the question exactly?
Well, the way Janice asked it was, I'm curious to know what some of the unique issues are that Jews of color are experiencing. So I don't know if she means more like in terms of anti-Semitism and or racism uniquely as holding two identities, per se. And I guess sub question for me is how, you know, in these specific initiatives or the idea of these initiatives, how someone who's both Black and Jewish feels about it.
I will offer, I'm sorry, David.
Oh, please, you first.
I want to offer a dear friend of mine shared that her very young son came home from Hebrew school one day with a huge bruise on his forehead. And that had happened because as the only Black Jewish child in the classroom, that he had been told that God didn't like people with Black skin and that he couldn't be Jewish because he had brown skin and he'd been beaten up. As a Black Jewish person, I experience a lot of anti-Semitism within the Black community that happens because I'm not necessarily assumed to be Jewish. And I also experience at times racism within the Jewish community because I'm not automatically perceived to be a part of that community. And I think that that experience is one that I've heard to be very the same of other Black Jewish people, Jews of color, which actually the JOC term includes Asian Jews and Latinx Jews and on and on. And so I think that the reason why dialogue is so very important is even that statement, I don't know a lot of Black Jews. How do we make it so that we become part of the automatic fabric of Judaism and the automatic fabric of being African American, so that we're not seen as an anomaly anymore, but an important part of the family?
I just want to say something that you got me thinking about this, and I have a bit of a something, maybe it's a bit of a different thought, but what I will say is this: I'm not necessarily for manufacturing societal shifts that have to sort of form organically and authentically. I think anytime we try to manufacture any sort of societal shift, it backfires. What I will say, when it comes to the embrace of Jews who are not white by the larger Jewish community, that will happen when it happens. You know, I think it will happen as a natural part of the evolution of America in general, and our entire notion of race begins to change. It will take a lot longer in the Jewish community, but that's because of the unique characteristics of what it means to be Jewish. You know, there's a reason why, one of the reasons why Jews have been around for a very long time is that it's very hard to become Jewish. And generally, you know, Jews don't want more Jews. We do everything possible to make it impossible to become Jewish. So that's why Jews are quite similar. And that's a fact. And it's a critique and it's an observation. It's not a call to action. It's not a call to call them colonizers. It's just to explain that the Jewish community and Jewish history is very unique. And there's a reason why most Jews don't look like me, or actually some of them do look like me, but most Jews in America look like Jill. There's reasons for this, and they also have to be honored. But what I will say is that I've been to 2 events recently in New York City, very important events, big Jewish events. And I was shocked to still see that I was the only person there who wasn't white. And it was more of a shock of, you know, as a community of Jews, we're in a very serious crisis right now. And I'm not in any way advocating, again, for any sort of manufactured, push to forcibly or inauthentically integrate situations. I don't believe in that. But what I do believe is when I look around a room of major Jewish events in New York City, fancy cosmopolitan, you know, events that should know better, and I see that I'm the only person there who's not white, it says to me that it says to me that this is not sustainable in America today. That actually, and this might contradict some of the things I've been saying earlier, but this is the reason why we need allyship today. We can't have a world where everybody is just like us today because there are only so many of us. And unfortunately, the powers aligned against us are very strong. It's essential that Jews today prioritize each other. They have to. But still, we've actually never need allies more in our history in America. We just have to have the right allies. We have to have allies that actually are allied with us and that respect us. And I think I can sort of end my spiel by saying, what Jews are facing right now, and this might be the most universal and bridge building element of all, what Jews are facing right now is a fight and battle for their civil rights. This is a civil rights movement because Jews are not enjoying the same types of protections and rights and benefits of being American as all other groups in the country right now. And this is a civil rights movement for Jews today. And I think we could also say that, in many ways, Jews were lucky enough in America, unlike any other minority, we didn't have to have a civil rights movement, but you know what? Like, nothing lasts forever. You always have to kind of, the bill will always come. And I think if we can frame it like that Jews are right now battling for their civil rights, I think everybody can understand that that is an American value, and it's very much an African American value.
Awesome. Thank you, David, for sharing. I would like to, honor our time together. This was a really spirited and rich conversation. I quickly want to share that we know that we didn't get to all of the questions and comments in the chat, but we have the ability to download and respond. So we will follow up with that after this event. This event is also being recorded, so we will have it provided through YouTube after our time together. And also, we will provide links for all of the initiatives that we shared today. I quickly just want to touch on a opportunity that CAM has right now. Currently, we've opened a fellowship program called the Robert M. Barron Bridge Building Fellowship at CAM. We are looking for 20 HBCU students to help provide assistance to their scholarship funding as far as $10,000 in scholarship. And we want to hear from them as far as their approach in how they've seen the civil rights alliances of the past between Black and Jewish communities, what the challenges are, and what projects that they can envision. This will enlist them into a one-year fellowship program where they will work together with TICFA Fund Fellows and make beautiful projects come to life in their local communities. So that opportunity is available on our CAM website. And if anyone has any additional information that they need, my name is Dazia, and my email address is Dazia, Dazia, at combatantisemitism.org. If you have any feedback, we will also be following up with a thank you email and would love to hear your comments and thoughts. This was really rich again, and we hope that we will continue to provide more opportunities to have these amazing discussions. And Jill, do you have anything that you would like to share as well?
Unless I missed it, if you just said this, I think we're going to try to take as many of the comments and questions that were left unaddressed and address them in some way as a group, have our nice roundtable group try and touch on them as best we can. So we apologize for not being able to get to all of them. We really wanted to, but we also didn't want to keep everyone here all night.
Yes, of course. And last but not least, thank you to our panelists. I know Charles had to drop off, but thank you, Irini. Thank you, David. Thank you, Charles. Thank you to Elise. Thank you to Dr. Harriet for joining on. Thank you to our CAM team. Gwen, thank you for helping us on the back end, moderate this discussion, and everybody have a peaceful, blessed night. And may we continue to go forward in this work together in our empowering way, fighting for our humanity and fighting for each other and our connection to each other and our communities. So thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, bye.